Welcome back. Every week on this show, we'd like to give you a steer towards some of the stories that will be in the news in the week ahead. Tomorrow, a new bill to legalise assisted dying will be lodged at the Scottish Parliament. If passed, it'll introduce the right to an assisted death for terminally ill, mentally competent adults. A cross-party steering group of MSPs have outlined their support for the bill in an open letter, but previous attempts to change legislation in Scotland have failed. Joining me now is Andrew Copson, Chief Executive of Humanists UK, and Dr Gordon MacDonald, CEO of Care Not Killing. Let me start with you, Andrew, if I may. There's something quite brutal, is there not? Something quite crude about legislating so that it's easier for people to commit suicide.
I don't think so. I think the brutality in modern medicine comes when it prolongs life beyond what's endurable or desirable for the person living. I think the brutality lies in the suffering, not just pain, but all sorts of suffering that people are experiencing in our country and around the world today when they want to end their lives with dignity. 300 people who are terminally ill commit suicide in this country today. I think that's the brutality. And what assisted dying laws do is resolve that brutality and allow people to have a compassionate and dignified end at a time of their own choosing.
Gordon, we all want to live a high quality life. We want dignity. We want sort of compassion. We want to be compos mentis. Why deny people that in, arguably the biggest hour at the end of their lives?
Well, people do die with dignity every week in this country through the hospice movement and palliative care. And we need to invest more money in palliative care rather than helping people to end their lives either through assisted suicide or with doctors killing them through euthanasia. Andrew and the Humanists and My Death, My Decision don't want just a law on assisted suicide. They want to extend it to include people who are not terminally ill, and they want euthanasia. And, when we look at what's happened in Belgium and the Netherlands, we see the terrible excesses that happen in those countries where we see people who are psychiatrically unwell being euthanized. We see children being euthanized. We see patients with dementia being euthanized. We see even debates about people who are just tired of life. And, that's where we'll end up in the UK.
But that's not proposed here, is it, Gordon? It's quite specific, this law. It's got many safeguards. You're talking about people in a very specific condition. Why do you have to sort of, obscure the argument by talking about possibilities that are not envisaged here?
Well, the MSPs have been discussing this for 5 years in the Scottish Parliament in a cross-party group. I've attended many of the cross-party group meetings, and I know what's been discussed in those meetings. And the issue of people with dementia has been discussed. The issue of wider than just having a narrow bill, which is currently being talked about, has been discussed. And we know that previous bills which were proposed in the Scottish Parliament, which the same groups supported euthanasia. So, we're under no illusions that this will be the end of the debate in the Scottish Parliament if this bill goes through.
Andrew, when someone is seriously ill, certainly when they're in pain, when there's the prospects of a full life are not great, they do get proper care, palliative care, in suitable institutions, and the pain relief often has a side effect of hurrying up the inevitable death in the end. Why go further than that? Why do you need to sort of go beyond what is happening in a slightly more organic way at the moment?
Palliative care is extremely important. I mean, everyone in this country probably has stories, I know I certainly do, of how enormously helpful and dignified palliative care has been for our own relatives at the end of their lives. But palliative care doesn't solve everybody's problems. There is suffering other than just pain that can come at the end of life. Palliative care cannot touch every area of the dying person's experience. And a way that many people want to leave this life is through a compassionate assistance to die at a time of their choosing. The dignity of choice is extremely important, I think, for all people, including dying. We extend the dignity of choice and freedom of choice as much as possible to every human being throughout their lives, and dying is just part of living after all. It is the last thing we'll do, but it is an important part of our life. I think choice should extend there. And there's also a sort of psychological comfort that comes to people as well, knowing they've got the option of an assisted death at the end of their life, if it comes to that. And besides, it's not the case that no one is having an assisted death. No British person is having an assisted death today. People who can afford to are going abroad to have assisted deaths and dying probably much earlier than they would if that option was available in this country. So this situation has to be resolved one way or another, and the sensible way is to do what most people want to happen and offer choice. What's wrong with choice?
How do you reassure people who think this is a slippery slope? And once you open that door, then, you know, it will slip into those things, including euthanasia that Gordon was warning about.
Well, slippery slopes are always a risk in any sort of public policy, and that's why I think it's important at every stage and whenever we might think about changes in our law to look at them carefully, rigorously, with scrutiny, as society is doing now about this, and stage by stage, if the law does change, then we'll know that it's been done with proper scrutiny. I don't agree, as Gordon unpleasantly implied, with the euthanizing of children or of people with dementia or of mentally ill people. I do actually agree that not only terminally ill people should have access to assisted dying, because I think people who are incurably suffering, like the campaigners Paul Lamb, who died earlier this week, or Tony Nicholson, who had locked-in syndrome, they weren't terminally ill, but they were incurably suffering. I do think assisted dying should be available to them as well. But I think that can come about as a result of an evidence-based, compassionate debate about what is reasonable, what is acceptable, what is fair, and what people want. Slippery slopes only happen if you let them, and I don't think we would let that happen.
Gordon, we've all heard horrific stories. Some of us know of personal cases involving friends. We all read about things in the newspapers. Locked-in syndrome is a particularly brutal state to be in. What is wrong in a situation like that for allowing somebody to do what they are desperate to do? And at the moment, what you do is force people to, sometimes when they are determined to leave us, to kill themselves in the most horrific way, where they literally have no choice but to sort of starve themselves and die of thirst and hunger in the end, in great pain, when we are capable as a nation of giving them a more humane, a more gentle death.
Well, I think the point that we've got to remember is that palliative care is effective in the vast bulk of cases, well, over 90% of cases. And yes, there are a few cases where they can't deal with all the physical pain. But Andrew has hinted at already and said a number of times that this isn't just about physical pain. And Henry Marsh said that recently in his recent media interviews too. This is not about physical pain. It's about
what's wrong with that, Gordon? What's wrong with allowing somebody who doesn't want to live, locked in their own body, paralyzed from head to toe? What's wrong with allowing somebody like that to just say, I've had enough, I don't want to stick around in this state?
Because you're requiring other people to be involved in the process. Because
but
you're
if they're
requiring
willing participants, why criminalize them?
Be complicit. Sorry?
But only because at the moment the law criminalises people who are behaving as they see it, compassionately. Why criminalise people who are doing compassionately what somebody, usually very, very close to them, is begging them to do?
Because we criminalise actions which we can't allow, society can't tolerate, because it opens up the possibility of abuse, and it's dangerous. You know, there aren't that many prosecutions for assisting suicide in this country, but there are some. And the reason the law is there is to protect people from people who are abusive. We've seen the Gosport hospital situation, you know, we saw Shipman, we've seen other scenarios in this country where we have abusive people. And, you know, that's why we have a law. We have a law to protect people and protect those who are most vulnerable. Not everybody is as articulate as Andrew, or as articulate as me, or as articulate as Henry Marsh. Not everybody has as much control in their life. And people who are vulnerable, people who are disabled, need protection by the law. That's why we have laws in this country. But the law is kind-hearted. It has a stern face, but it's kind-hearted. And we don't have lots of people being prosecuted for helping people to go to Dignitas in Switzerland. And I think that that's an acceptable compromise in terms of public policy, because it prevents abuses from happening.
Andrew, what do you think will happen? Is this going to become law? And if so, doesn't that raise the prospect of not having people going to Switzerland, but people from Wales and England crossing the border into Scotland in order to do something there that you cannot do in the rest of the UK?
Well, I would hope that when compassionate change in the law comes in any part of the UK, any jurisdiction in the UK, that other parts of the UK would follow, because there's nothing unusual about public opinion in Scotland compared with the rest of the UK. Well into the late 80% of people believe in a reform on the law of assisted dying. So I think when it comes, it might come all at once everywhere. I would like to think that, given that public opinion is now almost touching 90% in favour of assisted dying, given that there are new MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who have seen the case for change, given that increasingly parliamentarians see in their own lives and the lives of their constituents the case for change. Modern medicine is incredible. It has brought us enormous benefits. It has extended our lives to a spectacular length, which we're all very grateful for, but it's also brought new challenges, and they're becoming more and more obvious, like, for example, that it can extend our lives well beyond the point at which it is enjoyable for us or desirable for us. I think that all of those events, the underlying trends there, mean that change will come. And I think it's only a question of whether it comes now with this bill or very soon after